Sound rolling? All right,
One of the
and
cars that is not here, one of the rear engine cars that is not here is the 1996 Lola that was driven by Davy Jones to the second place finish in 1996, the first year of the IRL. It was a turbocharged car. The following year, everything was not normally aspirated, but that was the last year they got to use the original Indy cars when IRL took over as the racing organizer for the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. It's interesting that I have that car from the standpoint. First of all, it's a nice car. It's owned by Gallus, and it's the last car that Davy Jones drove at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway after he got hurt. Interestingly enough, the one I mentioned earlier, the car that belonged to A.J. Foyt that I bought in 1992, Davy Jones drove that, as I mentioned, in 1987. That was the first car that he drove at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. I've had occasion to speak to Davy, and he did not know that, and he's thrilled to know where those two cars are. As a matter of fact, one time he asked me to bring the car that I have back to Texas so he could display it, and I never got an opportunity to do it, and I feel bad about it because he told me that if I had done that he would actually given me the helmet that he drove in that 1996 race, which have been very special to me. I also have two rear engine cars here that were built by A.J. Foyt, and there was the only two tube frame rear engine cars that he built for the 1964 race. One had an Offenhauser engine in it, driven by Don Branson, and the other one had a V8, four-cam Ford V8, driven by Roger Ward to second place. Started on the outside of the front row and finished second. And that is a story in itself from the standpoint that they had fuel management problems. They changed from racing gasoline to methanol the night before the race. And when they did so, they put this fuel valve in backwards. And when Roger Ward, the driver, felt he was richening the fuel mixture, he was actually decreasing it, but it was the opposite way around, and he was using more fuel than they anticipated and had to make, if I'm not mistaken, it was either one or maybe two additional fuel stops, and that ended up costing him the race. And that was quite a deal from the standpoint that it was an engine that Ford had spent insurmountable amount of time and money to try to win the Indianapolis 500, and this was basically, the year that was going to take place. And because of that mix-up in the fuel valve, they came in second, which is not bad, but obviously it's not what Ford or automobile companies are looking for. And that was the last year that a Roadster won at Indianapolis, 1964. And after that, it's been nothing but rear engine cars. Also in the collection is a 1974 Valves Parnelli Jones VPJ rear engine car. It's got a turbocharged Offenhauser engine in it, driven by Al Enzer, and that was part of the super team of Al Enzer and Mario Andretti. The car never did very well. They lament to this day about all the money they spent building this super team and building these special cars designed by some of the top designers in Indianapolis lore, but it just didn't handle the way it did. And as a matter of fact, after I got the car, I was checking during the period I was buying the car, and shortly after I purchased it, I kept looking at the car, finding out if it was exactly what it was proposed to be. And I was trying to line up some decals from pictures I got from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And those, as I looked at them very closely, I found an area where I couldn't find one of the decals that was in the picture that was adjacent to another one. The one was there, but there was no place for the other one, referencing a nacoduct on the car. So we started looking at it closer and closer, and we found out that somewhere during the period of time that they originally built the car and they actually quit running the car, they'd actually cut 3 inches out of the chassis. And when I brought that up to one of the principals that is still with Parnelli Jones at his museum over in Torrance, he was kind of taken back that I'd found that. Not that anybody was covering anything up, but what the situation was is both Mario Andretti and Al Unser were convinced if they shortened the frame at least 3 inches, it would be more rigid and more drivable. That in fact did not prove to be true. But it was one of their giant efforts, Wells Parnelli Jones Racing Organization, to build these cars that went to the Speedway because they'd had such good luck doing that prior to this with the Johnny Lightning cars and things like that, they thought it was a shoe-in. But it's so funny how the time and money that was spent to build these cars, and they just don't pan out. And we all may be aware of the situation with Penske. I forget exactly the year, it was in the 90s, where they won the race the year before and all 3 of their cars were unable to qualify the following year. So the Indianapolis Motor Speedway is a magical place, but it can break your heart just as surely as it can get you to the highest levels of enthusiasm. So cut.
That was it.